Clara Wren set down her needle and rubbed her tired eyes. The lamplight flickered across the cramped boarding house room she'd called home for the past 3 years. Outside, the Missouri rain drummed against the window, matching the rhythm of her racing thoughts. On the small table before her lay 4 letters, all responses to the advertisement she'd placed in the Matrimonial Times 2 months prior. 3 of the letters were what she'd expected, flowery words from men who'd never met her, promises of grand houses and servants, descriptions of themselves that seemed too perfect to be true. One claimed to be a wealthy merchant from San Francisco, another a prosperous rancher from Texas who assured her she'd never lift a finger again. The third painted himself as a romantic poet seeking his muse. Clara had learned long ago that men who promised the moon rarely delivered even dust. But the 4th letter was different. Short, plain, almost rude in its brevity. Asterisk Miss Wren. Asterisk, I run cattle in Montana. Hard country. I need someone to manage the ranch kitchen and help with accounts. The work is steady. The pay is fair. Room and board included. If you can cook for 20 men and don't mind winter that lasts 7 months. Respond by return post. Asterisk C. Row asterisk asterisk Row Ranch. Dustvale, Montana Territory, asterisk. No promises of love, no descriptions of his appearance or prospects, not even a proper Mr. before his name. Just facts laid bare like bones in the desert. Clara picked up the letter again, studying the handwriting. Strong, clear strokes, no flourishes. A man who didn't waste ink or time. She'd written back asking for more details, and his response had been equally terse. Asterisk Ranch sits 40 miles from nearest town. Nearest neighbor is 15 miles. You'd have your own room off the kitchen. Sunday afternoons free. I don't drink, don't gamble, don't hit women. That's all you need to know. Coming or not asterisk. She almost smiled at that. Most men would have spent paragraphs describing their virtues. This C. Rowe simply stated what he didn't do, as if those were the only virtues that mattered. Perhaps they were. Clara stood and walked to the mirror, studying her reflection. 28 years old. And what did she have to show for it? Skilled hands that could embroider flowers so real butterflies might land on them. But no one in St. Joseph seemed to need such finery anymore. The factory-made goods were cheaper, faster. Her savings had dwindled to nothing, and Mrs. Hartley had made it clear that next month's rent wouldn't wait for promises. She wasn't beautiful. She'd made peace with that years ago. Too tall for most men's comfort. Her face too angular. Her manner too quiet. Her stepmother had always said she had the charm of a fence post and about as much warmth. No wonder your father died of disappointment. The woman had spat the night she'd thrown Clara out at 17. Looking at that face every day would kill any man's joy. But Clara had survived. She'd learned to sew, to cook, to keep accounts. She'd learned to be invisible when needed and visible only when useful. She'd learned that lonely was better than degraded, and that dignity could be maintained even on an empty stomach. Montana. She'd heard stories, wild country full of wild men, where winters could kill and summers could burn, where Indians still fought for their land and outlaws ruled the territories between towns. A place where a woman alone was either very brave or very foolish. But what choice did she have? Stay here and slowly starve on pride? At least this C. Rowe was honest about what he offered. Work for pay, shelter for service. No pretty lies about love or happiness. Just survival, fair and square. Clara folded the letter carefully and placed it in her trunk. Her few possessions wouldn't take long to pack 2 dresses, one for work and one for Sunday, though she doubted there'd be much use for the latter where she was going. Her mother's Bible, her sewing kit, a small daguerreotype of her parents from happier times, before her mother died, birthing a son who lived only 3 days, before her father remarried and lost himself in whiskey and sorrow. She'd leave at first light, catch the stage to Independence, then find passage with a wagon train heading north. The journey would take weeks, maybe longer if the weather turned. She had just enough money for passage and supplies. with nothing left for changing her mind. Clara sat at the small desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. Her hand hesitated over the ink pot. What did one write to a stranger who might become, what? An employer. That seemed the safest way to think of it. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. Asterisk, Mr. Rowe. Asterisk, I accept your offer. I will depart St. Joseph within the week and travel by the most direct route possible. I am experienced in cooking for large groups and maintaining household accounts. I require no special accommodations beyond those stated in your letter. I do not gossip, complain, or suffer from delicate sensibilities. I expect to arrive before the autumn storms. Asterisk C. Wren asterisk. She sealed the letter and set it aside for the morning post. Then she began to pack, folding each item carefully, as if she could fold away her doubts and fears with the same precision. The rain had stopped, and through the window, she could see stars appearing between the clouds. Somewhere out there, across prairies and mountains she'd never seen, was a ranch where a man named Rowe needed practical help, not romantic dreams. Perhaps that's what she needed too, a place where her worth was measured in meals cooked and ledgers balanced, not in beauty she didn't possess or charm she'd never learned. Clara allowed herself one moment of weakness, pressing her hand against the cold window glass. Please, she whispered to whatever might be listening. God, fate, or simply the indifferent stars. Let him be what he seems. Let this be real. Then she straightened her spine and returned to her packing. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford, but courage she could manage. She'd need it for the journey ahead, for the wild country that waited, for the stranger who wrote letters without lies. As she worked, Clara didn't think about love or loneliness. She thought about Montana winters and kitchen stoves, about cooking for 20 hungry men, about keeping accounts in a careful hand. She thought about Rowe, who promised nothing except what he could deliver. It was enough. It had to be enough. Because in the morning, she would leave this small room and everything she'd known, trading familiar disappointments for unknown challenges. She would go to Montana, to Rowe Ranch, to a man who didn't waste words on pretty promises. Clara Wren, who'd never been called beautiful, who'd never inspired poetry, who'd never been anyone's dream, would go to a place where those things didn't matter, where only strength counted, and skill, and the simple ability to endure. She folded her mother's Bible last, running her fingers over the worn leather cover. Inside, pressed between the pages of Psalms, was a single dried wildflower, the last thing her mother had touched before the fever took her. Clara had been 6 years old, too young to understand death, but old enough to know that something precious had left the world. Now, at 28, she understood loss all too well. But perhaps Montana would teach her something else. Not hope. She was too practical for that. But maybe, just maybe, it would teach her that there were still places in this world where honesty mattered more than beauty, where a woman's worth wasn't measured by her ability to simper and smile. The trunk closed with a final click. Tomorrow would come soon enough, bringing with it the first step of a journey to a man who signed his letters with only an initial, who promised nothing but work and shelter, who might be the most honest soul she'd ever encountered, or simply another disappointment in a life full of them. But tonight, Clara Wren sat in her narrow room and did something she hadn't done in years. She allowed herself to imagine a kitchen that was hers to command, a ledger that was hers to balance, a place where she belonged not because someone loved her, but because she was needed. It wasn't a dream of romance. It was something far more precious, a dream of purpose. And for a woman who'd been told she was worth nothing, that was everything. The stagecoach lurched to a halt, throwing Clara hard against the wooden seat. Through the dust-caked window, she could barely make out the shapes of buildings through the swirling sand. The driver's voice carried down from above, muffled by the wind. Dust veil end of the line. Clara gathered her traveling bag and stepped down into chaos. The sandstorm had arrived with them, turning the afternoon into premature twilight. Grit immediately filled her mouth. Nose, eyes. She pulled her shawl over her face, squinting through the brown haze for any sign of… what? She didn't even know what Sea Row looked like. Other passengers scattered quickly, familiar with the town's layout. Clara stood beside the coach, her trunk at her feet, feeling more alone than she had during the entire 3-week journey. The wind howled like a living thing, tearing at her clothes, her carefully pinned hair already coming loose. "Miss Wren." The voice came from her left. She turned to see a figure materializing from the dust, tall, broad-shouldered, hat pulled low. He didn't step closer, just stood there waiting for her answer. "Yes," she called back, having to raise her voice against the wind. He moved then, picking up her trunk as if it weighed nothing. "Wagons this way. Best hurry." Clara followed him, clutching her bag, trying to keep up with his long strides. Through the storm, she caught glimpses of the man who might be her employer. Worn boots, canvas pants, a coat that had seen better decades. When he turned to check if she was following, she saw a face that matched his letters, all hard angles and efficiency. No wasted softness. The wagon waited in the shelter of a building. 2 horses stood with their heads down, enduring. He loaded her trunk in the back, then turned to help her up. His hand was calloused, strong, and he released hers the moment she was seated. "Thank you, Mr. Rowe," she said. He paused in the act of walking around to the driver's side. "Just Calder," he said, "or Rowe, whichever suits." Then he was climbing up beside her, taking the reins. He didn't speak again, just clicked to the horses and guided them into the storm. Clara pulled her shawl tighter and studied him from the corner of her eye. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 35, though the sun and wind had carved lines around his eyes. Dark hair showed beneath his hat. A scar ran along his left jawline, white against sun-weathered skin. His hands on the reins were steady, confident. When a particularly vicious gust nearly tipped the wagon, he corrected without panic, without curse. They rode in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. The storm began to ease as they moved away from town, the air clearing enough for Clara to see the landscape endless grassland broken by distant hills. A sky so vast it made her chest tight. She'd never seen so much nothing in her life. "Ranch is another hour," Calder said suddenly. "Storm should be done by then." Clara nodded, though he wasn't looking at her. She wanted to ask questions about the ranch, the work, the men she'd be cooking for, but something in his manner discouraged conversation. This wasn't a social ride. This was transportation. Nothing more. When he finally turned the wagon down a rough track between 2 fence posts, Clara got her first look at Rowe Ranch. It wasn't impressive. A collection of weathered buildings scattered across a rise, function over form in every line. The main house was 2 stories of unpainted wood, barns, bunkhouse, various sheds. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys despite the afternoon hour. Calder pulled up in front of the house. He climbed down, walked around to her side, this time when he offered his hand. Clara noticed the long scar across his left wrist, disappearing beneath his sleeve. An old wound, but deep enough to have nearly killed him once. "Thank you," she said as her feet touched ground. He was already turning away, lifting her trunk. "I'll show you the kitchen." Clara followed him up the steps, across a porch that needed sweeping, through a door that scraped against warped floorboards. The interior was dim, sparse, no pictures on walls, no cushions on chairs, no woman's touch anywhere. The kitchen was at the back of the house, a large room dominated by a massive stove and long work tables. Everything was filthy. Grease coated the stove. Unwashed pots towered in the dry sink. The floor hadn't seen a mop in months. "Cook left 2 days ago," Calder said, setting her trunk down. "Men have been fending for themselves." Clara walked slowly through the disaster, cataloging what needed doing. The stove would take hours to clean properly. The pantry, glimpsed through an open door, was chaos. But the bones were good, plenty of space, decent equipment, windows for light and air. "My room?" she asked. He gestured to a door near the pantry. "Through there. Has its own stove for winter. Door to the outside if you need it." She opened the door to find a small but clean space. Iron bed, dresser, washstand, chair, a rag rug on the floor, plain muslin curtains at the window. It was more than she'd had in St. Joseph. When she turned back, Calder was watching her with an unreadable expression. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, employer and employee, stranger and stranger. "I'm tall," Clara said finally. It seemed important to address it directly. "Taller than most expect." "I can see that," Calder replied. His tone gave nothing away. Not pleasure, not disappointment, just acknowledgement. "And I'm plain," she continued, lifting her chin slightly. "If you were expecting—" "I wasn't expecting anything," he interrupted, "except someone who could cook and keep accounts. Can you?" "Yes." "Then we're square." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Dinner's at 6. 23 men, counting me. Breakfast is before dawn. Questions?" Clara looked around the wrecked kitchen. "Where is Mr. Cook now?" A ghost of something, maybe amusement, crossed Calder's face. "Sleeping off a bottle in the bunkhouse. He's still technically employed until you prove you can handle the work. That bother you?" "No." Clara began rolling up her sleeves. "But he's not allowed in my kitchen while I'm cleaning it." "Your kitchen." This time the amusement was clearer. "If I'm cooking in it, it's mine," Clara said firmly. "Those are my terms." Calder studied her for a moment. She waited, hands steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. She'd learned long ago that if you didn't establish boundaries from the start, you'd never have them. "Fair enough," he said finally. "I'll let the men know." He left without farewell, the door closing firmly behind him. Clara stood alone in the filthy kitchen, afternoon light slanting through greasy windows. Outside, she could hear voices, men returning from whatever work occupied them. Soon they'd expect food, these 23 strangers who would judge her by her biscuits and stew, not her face or figure. Clara allowed herself one moment to feel the enormity of it. Then she located an apron in a drawer, tied it around her waist, and got to work. She started with the stove, heating water to help cut through the grease. As she scrubbed, she thought about Calder Rowe. He wasn't what she'd feared. No leer in his eyes, no suggestive comments about her traveling alone. But he wasn't welcoming either. He was exactly what his letters had promised, a man who needed practical help and would pay fairly for it. The question was whether she could survive in this hard place. With these hard men, doing hard work. The question was whether plain, tall Clara Wren, who'd never inspired anything but her stepmother's contempt, could make herself indispensable enough to stay. By the time the sun began to set, she had the stove gleaming and a simple meal planned from the supplies she could salvage. She'd found salt pork, beans, flour for biscuits. Not fancy, but filling. Tomorrow she'd inventory properly, make a list for supplies. As she worked, Clara didn't think about the man who'd brought her here, with his scarred hands and careful distance. She thought only of the next task, the next hour, the next meal. It was safer that way. The first week at Rowe Ranch taught Clara the true meaning of exhaustion. She rose at 4 each morning, lighting the kitchen stove in darkness, her breath visible in the cold air. By the time the men filed in for breakfast at 5:30, she had biscuits baking, coffee boiling, salt pork frying, and porridge bubbling thick and hot. 23 men, 23 different appetites, preferences, and ways of showing displeasure. They ate like wolves, silent and efficient, shoveling food with single-minded purpose before heading out to face another day of brutal labor. At first, they barely acknowledged her existence. She was a function, Not a person, the source of food. Nothing more. She caught their sideways glances, heard the muttered comments when they thought she couldn't hear. "Another one of Rose's experiments?" Someone grumbled. "Won't last the month," predicted another. But it was Cook who made her life truly difficult. The former cook hadn't taken his demotion well. He haunted the edges of the kitchen, finding fault with everything. The coffee was too weak, the biscuits too heavy, the beans undercooked. He never spoke to her directly, just voiced his complaints to anyone within earshot, especially when Calder wasn't around. "Used to be a man could get a decent meal here," Cook announced one morning, pushing his half-empty plate away with theatrical disgust. "Now we got some spinster pretending she knows how to feed working men." Clara kept her hands steady as she cleared plates. She'd heard worse in St. Joseph. Words were just air, and she'd learned long ago not to waste energy on air. But Cook wasn't content with words. Small sabotages began, salt containers left uncapped to spill. The damper on the stove mysteriously closed so her bread burned. Supplies moved from where she'd organized them. Each morning brought new obstacles to overcome. Clara endured it all in silence, adapting, persevering. She learned to check everything twice, to hide the good vanilla extract, to wake even earlier to undo whatever mischief had been done overnight. The men watched this quiet war with interest, placing unspoken bets on who would break first. It was Luther, the old hand who worked the horses, who first showed approval. He cleaned his plate one morning and nodded to her, just once, just barely. But it was acknowledgement. Soon others followed. Not friendship, not warmth, but a grudging acceptance that she could, in fact, cook. The kitchen became her fortress. She attacked its years of neglect with fierce determination, scrubbing until her hands cracked and bled. She reorganized the pantry, creating order from chaos. She mended the torn curtains, scraped grease from every surface, even painted the shelves with a can of whitewash she found in a shed. Slowly, meal by meal, the kitchen transformed. It began to smell of bread and cinnamon instead of rancid grease. The windows sparkled. The floor revealed itself to be good pine beneath the dirt. It became, as she'd declared that first day, her kitchen. Calder appeared at meals with the rest, eating in characteristic silence. But Clara noticed he came by at odd times too, mid-morning for coffee, late afternoon when she was kneading bread. He never spoke beyond basic necessities. Just took his coffee and left, but his portion sizes grew, and his plate always came back empty. One evening, after a particularly hard day, when Cook had somehow fouled her soup pot with salt, Clara found Calder standing in the kitchen doorway. The dinner dishes were done, and she was working on the next day's bread, her movements automatic despite her exhaustion. "Cook giving you trouble?" he asked. Clara's hands didn't pause in their kneading. "Nothing I can't handle." "That wasn't what I asked." She looked up then, meeting his eyes directly. "Yes, he's giving me trouble, but I've dealt with worse, and I'll outlast him. Unless you've changed your mind about my employment." "No." He moved into the kitchen, poured himself coffee from the ever-present pot. "Just wondering if I need to have a word." "I fight my own battles, Mr. Rowe." "Calder," he corrected. "And I'm not offering to fight for you, just to remind Cook who signs his pay voucher." Clara returned to her kneading. "That would make it worse. They already think I'm here because—" She stopped, heat rising in her cheeks. "Because what?" She kept her eyes on the dough. "Because I'm a woman alone who answered an advertisement. They make assumptions." "Let them," Calder said flatly. "Their assumptions don't change the facts. You cook better than Cook ever did, and you don't drink up the vanilla extract. That's all that matters." It was the longest speech she'd heard from him. Clara shaped the dough into loaves, aware of him watching. His presence should have made her nervous, but instead she found it oddly companionable. He didn't fill the silence with chatter, didn't require entertainment. "Where did you learn to cook?" he asked eventually. "My mother, first, then a boarding house in St. Joseph." The owner there taught me to cook for crowds. She glanced at him. Where did you get that scar? She hadn't meant to ask, but something about the late hour and the quiet kitchen made directness easier. His hand went unconsciously to his wrist. Bull, years back, caught me with a horn, tore clear to bone. Luther stitched it with horsehair. Said I was too stubborn to die. Seems accurate, Clara observed. To her surprise, he almost smiled. Probably. He finished his coffee, set the cup in the dry sink. At the door, he paused. The men will come around. Give them time. And if Cook crosses a line, you tell me. That's not weakness, that's sense. Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone with her bread and her thoughts. She shaped the last loaves carefully, pondering this strange man who'd hired her. He wasn't kind, exactly, but he was fair. He wasn't warm, but he wasn't cold either. He was simply steady, unchanging as the prairie wind. The next morning brought a small miracle. Her salt container remained capped. The stove damper was where she'd left it. Nothing had been disturbed. When Cook appeared for breakfast, he took his plate without comment and ate in sullen silence. Clara didn't ask what Calder had said or done, but she noticed Cook now gave her kitchen a wide berth, and the other men seemed to relax fractionally in her presence. She was still an outsider, still suspect, but she was no longer fair game. Days passed in routine. Cook, clean, bake, serve. The men revealed themselves in small ways. Luther's preference for extra sugar in his coffee, young Tom's hatred of onions, the way the twins Jake and John always sat together and shared whatever treat she made for Sunday dinner. Clara found rhythm in the work. Her hands, soft from years of fine embroidery, grew calloused and strong. Her back ached constantly from bending over the stove and sink. But there was satisfaction in feeding hungry men who did honest work, in seeing her kitchen shine, in the grudging nods that had replaced suspicious glares. She began to venture out on Sunday afternoons, her free time. The ranch sprawled for miles, but she kept to the near pastures, learning the lay of the land. Sometimes she'd see the men working cattle in the distance. Calder's tall figure recognizable even from afar. He sat a horse like he'd been born to it, moving with the animal as one creature. One Sunday she found a small creek bordered by cottonwoods, a pocket of green in the endless brown grass. She sat on a fallen log, letting the rare silence wash over her. No demands, no expectations, just the whisper of wind in leaves. Good spot. Clara startled. Calder stood a few feet away, having approached silent as a shadow. His horse grazed nearby, reins trailing. I didn't mean to trespass. She said, Not trespassing, it's ranch land. You're ranch folk. He settled on a nearby rock, pulling out a knife and a piece of wood. I come here sometimes too, quiet. They sat without speaking. Clara watching the water. Calder whittling with practiced strokes. The silence should have been awkward but wasn't. It was the comfortable quiet of two people who didn't need words to fill space. Winter's coming, he said eventually. Gets hard here. Harder than anything you've known. I'll manage. Expect you will. He held up the piece of wood, now roughly shaped like a horse. You're tougher than you look. Clara wasn't sure if it was compliment or observation. With Calder, the two seemed interchangeable. So are you, she replied. This time his almost smile was clearer. Maybe so. As the sun began to sink, they walked back together, Calder leading his horse. At the house, he touched his hat brim, the closest thing to courtesy she'd seen from him, and headed to the barn. Clara returned to her kitchen to start supper, feeling something she couldn't quite name. Not happiness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of belonging. That night, as she served thick stew and fresh bread to 23 hungry men, Clara caught Calder watching her from his place at the head of the table. When their eyes met, he nodded, just once, just barely, like Luther had that first week. But from him, it felt like a declaration. She was staying. They all knew it now. Even Cook, glowering over his bowl, couldn't deny the truth written in empty plates and satisfied sighs. Clara Wren, the too-tall spinster from Missouri, had claimed her kitchen and held it against all comers. It wasn't a love story. It wasn't even a friendship yet. But it was a beginning. And for now, that was enough. The ice storm struck without warning on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. Clara had just pulled bread from the oven when the first crack echoed across the ranch, sharp as gunfire, followed by the groaning crash of timber. Through the kitchen window, she watched the hay barn's roof buckle under the weight of ice, support beams snapping like matchsticks. The men scrambled from all directions, Calder's voice cutting through the chaos as he shouted orders. The horses in the barn were screaming, trapped as walls began to lean inward, without thinking. Clara grabbed her shawl and ran outside, the ice turning the ground into a treacherous sheet of glass. "Get back inside," Luther yelled at her. But she was already skidding toward the barn where men struggled with the jammed doors. The next minutes blurred together, splintering wood, panicked horses, men cursing and heaving against frozen hinges. Then the main support beam cracked overhead, and everyone scrambled backward except Calder. He dove forward, directly under the falling timber, shoving young Tom clear just as the beam crashed down. Clara heard herself cry out as Calder disappeared in a cloud of hay dust and debris. The men surged forward, pulling frantically at the wreckage. When they finally dragged him free, his left shoulder was torn open, blood spreading dark across his shirt. "Get him to the house," Luther commanded. Jake and John lifted their boss between them, his face gray with pain but still conscious, still trying to give orders about the horses. Clara flew ahead, her mind already cataloging what she'd need: hot water, clean cloth, the sewing kit she used for mending. Her hands were steady as she cleared the kitchen table, though her heart hammered against her ribs. They laid Calder out like a corpse, and Clara got her first clear look at the damage. The beam had caught him from the shoulder to mid-back, tearing through coat and shirt to the flesh beneath. Not deep enough to kill, but bad enough to need serious attention. Someone should ride for the doctor, one of the men suggested. "In this ice," Luther shook his head. "Take 4 hours if you made it at all. She'll have to do it." All eyes turned to Clara. She was already cutting away Calder's ruined shirt, exposing the full extent of the wound. The sight made several men step back, but Clara had seen worse. Her mother had taught her basic doctoring before she died: how to clean wounds, stitch flesh, fight infection with whatever was at hand. "I need carbolic acid from the barn supplies," she said crisply. "And someone boil more water, clean water, not from the horse trough. Tom, my sewing box is in my room. Top drawer, hurry!" The men scattered to obey, leaving her alone with Calder. His eyes were closed, jaw clenched against the pain. She pressed a clean cloth against the worst of the bleeding, leaning her weight into it. "This is going to hurt," she warned. "Already hurts," he ground out. "I mean it's going to hurt worse." His eyes opened then, fixed on her face. "You done this before?" "Yes, my mother was a midwife. She taught me." "That's not exactly the same thing." "Flesh is flesh," Clara said practically. "And you're not in a position to be particular." Tom burst in with her sewing box, followed by Luther with the carbolic acid. Clara worked with focused efficiency, cleaning the wound while the men held Calder still. He never cried out, though she saw his knuckles go white where he gripped the table edge. The stitching was the worst part. Her embroidery needle was too fine for tough flesh. She had to use a leather needle from the barn supplies. Each push through skin and muscle made Calder's whole body tense, but he kept his eyes on her face, as if she were an anchor point in a sea of pain. "Almost done," she murmured, tying off another stitch. "You were lucky. Nothing vital hit." "Don't feel lucky," he managed. "You saved Tom. That was brave." "That was stupid. Now who's going to run this place if I'm laid up?" "You're not going to be laid up," Clara said firmly. "You're going to rest for a few days. Let this heal properly, then be back ordering everyone around before we know it." "That's so. That's so. Because if you don't, I'll tie you to this table myself." Despite everything, his mouth twitched toward that almost smile. "Yes, ma'am." By the time she finished, full dark had fallen. The ice storm had passed, leaving devastation in its wake. Half the hay barn had collapsed, though the men had saved all the horses. Various outbuildings showed damage, but everyone was alive, and that counted as victory. Clara helped Calder sit up, wrapping his shoulder and chest with clean bandages. His face had gone from gray to white, and she could see the effort it took to stay upright. "Can you make it upstairs?" she asked. He nodded, but when he tried to stand, his legs buckled. Luther caught him on one side, Jake on the other. "We got you, boss," Luther said gruffly. Clara followed them up, carrying water and extra bandages. Calder's room was as sparse as the rest of the house. Bed, chair, washstand. Nothing more. They eased him down, and Clara shooed the men out. "I can manage," Calder protested as she began unlacing his boots. "You can barely sit up." She worked efficiently, getting his boots off, settling him back against the pillows. "You need to rest. I'll bring soup later." "The men need supper." "The men can wait an extra hour, or Cook can actually earn his keep for once." She pulled the blanket up, careful of his bandages. "Sleep, that's an order." He was too exhausted to argue further. As she turned to leave, his hand caught hers, just for a moment, just barely. His palm was rough with calluses, warm despite the pain. "Thank you," he said quietly. Clara squeezed his hand briefly, then pulled away. "Rest," she repeated, and fled before he could see the color rising in her cheeks. Downstairs, she found the kitchen full of men waiting anxiously. The sight of her seemed to reassure them. "He'll be fine," she announced, "but he needs rest and careful tending. No one's to bother him without good reason." "What about the ranch?" someone asked. "Who gives the orders?" Luther cleared his throat. "Reckon we know our jobs. Been doing this long enough. Miss Clara tends the boss. We tend the ranch. Anyone got a problem with that?" No one did. As they filed out to assess the storm damage, Clara noticed Cook hadn't appeared. Just as well. She had enough to handle without his sulking. She kept supper simple that night, beans and cornbread. Nothing fancy. The men ate quietly, the empty chair at the head of the table a reminder of their vulnerability. Ranch life was dangerous enough without ice storms adding to the hazards. After cleaning up, Clara prepared a tray for Calder. Beef broth, soft bread, willow bark tea for the pain. She knocked softly before entering, finding him awake but fever bright. "Not hungry," he said immediately. "Don't care." She set the tray on the bedside table, helped him sit up. "You need food to heal, and the tea will help with pain." He submitted to her ministrations with poor grace, but managed most of the broth and tea. Clara checked his bandages, pleased to see minimal fresh bleeding. "You should have stayed inside," he said as she worked. "When the barn started coming down, that was dangerous. So was diving under a falling beam." "That's different." "Why? Because you're a man." "Because I'm responsible for everyone here." Clara finished adjusting the bandage and met his eyes. "And I'm responsible for keeping everyone fed and healthy. Hard to do that if the boss bleeds to death on my clean kitchen table." He studied her face in the lamplight. She knew what he saw. Plain features, angular jaw, nothing soft or beautiful. But his expression held something she couldn't quite read. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. "What did you expect?" "Someone less." He seemed to struggle for words, unusual for a man who used them so sparingly. "Someone who'd need protecting, coddling. You don't need either." "No," Clara agreed. "I don't." "That's good." The fever was making him talk more than usual. Clara knew she should leave. Let him rest. But something kept her there, sitting on the hard chair beside his bed. "Why did you answer my letter?" he asked suddenly. "The truth." Clara considered. "Because you didn't lie, didn't promise things you couldn't deliver, didn't pretend hiring a housekeeper was anything more than what it was." "And that was enough just honesty?" "That was everything." She stood, gathering the tray. "You should sleep now. I'll check on you in the night." "Clara," her name from his lips stopped her at the door. "I'm glad you came." She didn't trust herself to speak, just nodded and slipped out. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, pressing her hands to her burning cheeks. This wasn't what she'd bargained for. She'd wanted work, purpose, a place to belong. She hadn't expected, whatever this was, this awareness that sparked when he looked at her, this flutter when he said her name. Dangerous thinking. She was his employee, nothing more. He'd been kind because she'd helped him, but kindness wasn't courtship. Men like Calder Rowe didn't court women like her. Tomorrow he'd be better, back to his taciturn self, and this moment would be forgotten. But as Clara returned to her kitchen, she couldn't forget the weight of his hand on hers, the way he'd said her name like it meant something. She worked late into the night, baking tomorrow's bread, trying to lose herself in familiar routine, but every creak of the house made her think of him upstairs, wounded because he'd put someone else's safety before his own. At midnight, she climbed the stairs with fresh water and bandages. He was sleeping fitfully, fever sweat on his brow. She bathed his face gently, checked the wound. Still no sign of infection. Thank God. As she turned to go, his hand caught hers again. This time, his eyes stayed closed, but his grip was firm. "Stay," he mumbled. "Just stay." Clara knew she should pull away, knew what the men would think if they found her here come morning. But something in his voice, vulnerable in a way she'd never heard, made her sink back into the chair. "All right," she whispered. "I'll stay." His hand relaxed, but didn't release hers. And there in the darkness, listening to his breathing ease into deeper sleep, Clara admitted what she'd been fighting since that first silent wagon ride. She was in trouble, deep, dangerous trouble. Because somewhere between the first meal and this moment, she'd started caring about Calder Rowe as more than an employer. And that, more than any ice storm, threatened everything she'd come here to build. The nightmare came as it always did, in the dead hours between midnight and dawn. Clara was 13 again, standing in her stepmother's parlor, wearing the dress that had been her mother's white muslin with tiny blue flowers. Her father swayed in the doorway, bottle in hand, while her stepmother's voice cut like broken glass. "Look at her, Charles, dressed up like she's something special, like anyone would want that face at their table." Margaret Wren's laugh was cruel. Your first wife must be spinning in her grave, seeing what she birthed. In the dream, Clara tried to run, but her feet were frozen. Her stepmother advanced, scissors gleaming. Maybe if we cut that hair, took her down a notch. The blades came closer, closer. Clara woke gasping, her nightgown soaked with cold sweat. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The small room felt foreign in the darkness. Then she heard the wind rattling the windows and remembered Montana, Rowe Ranch, safe. She pressed shaking hands to her face, trying to steady her breathing. 3 months since the last nightmare. She'd thought perhaps they were finally fading, but tonight's had been vivid as ever. She could still smell her stepmother's lavender perfume, still feel the scissors catching in her hair before her father had finally intervened. The room felt suffocating. Clara rose, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and slipped out through the kitchen door. The November night was bitter cold, but she needed air, needed sky, needed to remind herself that she was 28, not 13, that Margaret Wren was 1,000 miles away and couldn't hurt her anymore. She made it to the porch steps before her legs gave out. She sank down, pulling her knees to her chest, shivering from more than cold. The tears came then, silent and shameful. She hadn't cried in years, had thought herself past such weakness, but sometimes the memories ambushed her, leaving her feeling like that frightened girl again. "Clara?" She jerked upright. Calder stood in the doorway, favoring his left side where the wound was still healing. He shouldn't be up. She'd told him repeatedly that too much movement could tear the stitches. "Go back to bed," she managed, turning her face away. "You'll hurt yourself." Instead, he eased down beside her on the step. She heard his sharp intake of breath at the movement, but knew better than to fuss. He was stubborn as a mule about showing weakness. They sat in silence. Clara kept her face averted, mortified that he'd found her like this. No doubt he was regretting hiring such an unstable woman. Come morning, he'd probably suggest she might be happier elsewhere. "Bad dream?" he asked finally. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Want to tell me?" "No." "All right." More silence. Clara expected him to leave, to return to his warm bed and pretend this hadn't happened. Instead, he shifted slightly, and she felt wool settle around her shoulders, his coat still warm from his body. "You're supposed to be resting," she whispered. Couldn't sleep. Shoulder aches worse lying down. She knew he was lying. She'd given him enough willow bark tea to knock out a horse, but she didn't call him on it, too grateful for the company to question why he was really awake. "I get them too sometimes," he said quietly. "Dreams. About the war." Clara glanced at him, surprised. He'd never mentioned military service. "Cavalry," he continued, staring out at the darkness. 3 years. Saw things. Well, things that visit at night sometimes." "Is that where—" She gestured vaguely at his wrist. "No, that was stupidity with a bull. The war left different scars." He was quiet for a moment. "Point is, nothing shameful about bad dreams. We all got ghosts." Clara pulled his coat tighter around herself. "Mine are pathetic compared to war memories. Just family troubles." "Pain is pain. Doesn't matter if it comes from bullets or words." The simple understanding in his voice nearly broke her composure again. She pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting for control. "No one's ever seen me like this," she admitted. "I'm always controlled, contained, strong." "You are strong. Doesn't mean you can't have moments." He shifted again, and his shoulder brushed hers. "Everybody needs someone to see them sometimes. Really see them." Clara lowered her hands, looking at him in the moonlight. His profile was all sharp angles and shadows, but his expression was softer than she'd ever seen it. "Then sleep is mine tonight," he said quietly. "Here, I mean, not just, you shouldn't be alone after dreams like that." The impropriety of it should have scandalized her, sitting outside in her nightclothes with a man, wearing his coat, contemplating his invitation. But propriety had never kept her warm at night or safe from nightmares. "The men will talk," she said weakly. "Let them. They talk anyway. Your reputation. My reputation is my business. Your well-being is my concern." The simple declaration undid her. Fresh tears spilled over, and she didn't try to stop them. Calder didn't speak, didn't try to comfort her with empty words. He just sat there, solid and steady, letting her cry out whatever poison the nightmare had stirred up. When the tears finally stopped, Clara felt emptied but cleaner somehow, like a festering wound that had finally been drained. "Better?" Calder asked. "Yes, thank you." "Come on, then. Too cold to stay out here?" He stood carefully, and she saw him wince. Without thinking, she moved to support his good side. He didn't protest, letting her take some of his weight as they made their way inside. In the kitchen, she steered him to a chair. "I'll make tea." "Clara, please, I need to do something." He subsided, watching as she built up the fire and put the kettle on. Her hands were steady now, the familiar routine soothing. She made chamomile for both of them, adding honey to his cup. They drank in companionable silence. The kitchen felt different at night, smaller, more intimate. The lamp cast a golden circle that held the darkness at bay. "Will you tell me?" Calder asked eventually. "About the dream." Clara stared into her cup. "My stepmother, she wasn't kind. After my father remarried, after my mother died, I became an inconvenience. Too tall, too plain, too much my mother's daughter." "How old were you?" 7 when mother died, 8 when he remarried. She took a shaky breath. Margaret wanted her own children to be first in everything. I was competition, even though I never wanted to be, so she diminished me, daily, constantly, until I believed every word. Your father allowed this. My father was a weak man who found courage in bottles. The bitterness in her own voice surprised her. He'd feel guilty sometimes, try to intervene, but Margaret always won in the end. "When did you leave?" 17, the night she came at me with scissors, wanting to cut my hair because someone at church had complimented it. My father stopped her, but I knew it was only a matter of time before. She shrugged. I left that night with what I could carry. Never went back. Calder was quiet for a long moment. Then, their loss. Clara looked up, startled. "What?" "Their loss," he repeated. "They had you and threw you away. Fools, both of them." The simple verdict, delivered in his matter-of-fact tone, meant more than 100 flowery compliments would have. "I'm too tall," she said, testing. "Too plain, too—" "You're exactly right," Calder interrupted. "Height means you can reach the high shelves without asking for help. Plain means you don't waste time on foolishness. You're practical, capable, strong. Any man with sense would see the value in that." "And are you a man with sense?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Heat flooded her cheeks, but Calder didn't seem offended. "I like to think so," he said quietly. "Enough sense to know what matters. Anyway." Their eyes met and held. Something shifted in the air between them. Subtle but unmistakable. Not a declaration. Not yet, but an acknowledgement that whatever was growing between them was mutual. "You should rest," Clara said finally. "That shoulder needs—" "Will you have more dreams if I leave?" She considered lying, then nodded. "Then I'll stay, just until you sleep." He gestured to the kitchen. "Got a perfectly good chair right here." "Calder, you can't. I spent 3 years sleeping in mud and rain. A kitchen chair's luxury compared to that." Clara knew she should protest further, should send him to his bed and face her demons alone, as she always had. But the thought of him there, standing guard against nightmares, was too comforting to refuse. "All right," she whispered. She banked the fire and turned down the lamp. At her bedroom door, she paused, looking back at him. "Thank you for seeing me." His face was shadowed, but she heard the smile in his voice. "Thank you for letting yourself be seen." Clara slipped into her room, leaving the door slightly ajar. She could hear him settling into the chair, the quiet sounds oddly soothing. For the first time in memory, she wasn't alone with her ghosts. She fell asleep listening to his breathing, steady as a heartbeat. And when dawn came, bringing no more nightmares, she found him still there, asleep in the chair, head tipped back, keeping watch as promised. The sight made her chest tight with something that wasn't quite gratitude and wasn't quite longing, but lived somewhere between the two. She covered him with a blanket and started breakfast quietly, letting him sleep. When the men filed in for morning meal, they found their boss dozing in a kitchen chair and their cook humming softly as she worked. If they drew conclusions, they kept them to themselves. But Clara noticed Luther hiding a smile, and even Cook seemed subdued. Later, when Calder woke and tried to apologize for falling asleep, Clara simply handed him coffee and said, "You kept the nightmares away. That's all that matters." And in the look he gave her, warm and wondering, she saw an echo of her own growing certainty. This thing between them wasn't simple employer and employee anymore. It was something deeper, stronger, forged in midnight tears and quiet understanding. Something that might, given time and courage, become the home she'd never dared hope for. The whispers started small, like smoke seeping under a door. Clara first noticed them at the general store when she made the weekly supply run. Mrs. Holstead, the shopkeeper's wife, served her with pinched lips and averted eyes, measuring out flour like it pained her to touch anything Clara might use. "Heard you're keeping unusual hours up at the Row place." "Mrs." Holstead said, her tone dripping false concern. "Must be terribly tiring. All that extra work." Clara kept her expression neutral as she checked her list. "The work is exactly as Mr. Rowe advertised. Nothing unusual about it." "Of course." Mrs. Holstead's smile was sharp as a blade. "Still, a woman alone with all those men. People do talk. People always talk," Clara replied evenly, "whether there's cause or not." She left with her supplies, back straight despite the weight of the gossip following her out the door. But the damage was spreading. At the butcher's, Mr. Garrett barely acknowledged her presence. The woman at the dress shop turned her back entirely, pretending not to hear Clara's request for thread. By the time she returned to the ranch, Clara's jaw ached from clenching it. She unloaded supplies in rigid silence, aware of Calder watching from the barn doorway. His shoulder had healed enough for light work, though she still caught him favoring it. "Trouble in town?" he asked when she passed. "Nothing I can't handle." He fell into step beside her. "That's becoming your answer for everything." "Because it's true." "Clara." He caught her arm gently. "What happened?" She wanted to brush him off, maintain the walls she'd built. But something in his eyes, genuine concern without pity, made her relent. "The proper ladies of Dust Vale have decided I'm a fallen woman," she said bluntly. "Apparently, caring for you when you were injured was improper. Our conversation that night doubly so." Calder's expression darkened. "Who said what exactly?" "It doesn't matter." "It matters." His voice carried an edge she'd rarely heard. "Names. Clara." "Mrs. Holstead was the most direct, but they're all thinking it. You can see it in their faces." She pulled free of his grip. "I told you they'd talk. And I told you I don't care about talk." "Well, I have to care. I'm the one who needs supplies from their stores. Who has to face their judgment every week?" They'd reached the kitchen. Clara busied herself putting things away, needing the familiar actions to steady herself. Calder leaned against the doorframe, a thundercloud in human form. "I'll speak to them," he said. "You'll do no such thing." Clara spun to face him. "That would only make it worse. The big rancher defending his... whatever they think I am." "You're my employee. I have a right to..." "I'm a woman living unmarried in a house with a man. In their minds, that makes me one thing only." The words tasted bitter. "Your defense would just confirm their suspicions." Calder was quiet for a long moment. Then, "This isn't right. Very little in life is..." Clara turned back to her work. "I've weathered worse than small-town gossip." But it wasn't just gossip. Over the following days, the situation escalated. Someone left a soiled Dove's calling card on the porch. The minister's wife crossed the street to avoid her. Even some of the ranch hands started looking at her differently, eyes lingering where they shouldn't. The breaking point came when Cook finally overplayed his hand. Clara was kneading bread after supper, the kitchen empty except for the sound of her work. She didn't hear him enter until he spoke. Well, working late again or waiting for the boss?" She didn't turn. "Kitchen's closed. Cook, you missed supper." "Maybe I'm not hungry for food." The implication in his tone made her skin crawl. Clara reached casually for the rolling pin, kept her voice steady. Then you should find somewhere else to be. Come now, no need to play coy. He moved closer. She could smell the whiskey on him. Everyone knows what you really are. Why the boss gets special treatment. Might as well share the wealth. Clara turned then, rolling pin in hand. Get out! Feisty. I like that. He lunged forward. Clara swung. The rolling pin caught him across the temple with a satisfying crack. Cook dropped like a stone, blood trickling from his hairline. She stood over him, breathing hard, weapon still raised. He groaned but didn't get up, eyes unfocused from drink and the blow. Touch me again, she said clearly, and I'll do worse than knock you senseless. What's going on here? Calder filled the doorway, taking in the scene with one swift glance. His expression went from confusion to fury in a heartbeat. Cook decided to test whether the town gossip was true. Clara said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, too calm, too distant. I disagreed. Calder crossed to Cook in 2 strides, hauled him up by his shirt front. The former cook swayed, still dazed. You're done, Calder said, voice deadly quiet. Off my land by sunrise. Show your face again. I'll horsewhip you myself. He shoved Cook toward the door. Jake and Tom appeared, drawn by the commotion. Get him to the bunkhouse, Calder ordered. Make sure he packs. Escort him off the property at first light. The men dragged Cook away. Clara realized she was shaking. The rolling pin clattered from her numb fingers. Clara, Calder reached for her. Don't! She backed away. Please, just don't. He hurt you. No, I handled it. A hysterical laugh bubbled up. Like I handle everything, but I'm tired. Calder, so tired of having to handle everything. You shouldn't have to. But I do, the words exploded out. Because I'm a woman alone, and that makes me fair game. Because I dared to take work where I could find it. Because I sat with you when you were hurt, and people saw and decided that made me a... She broke off, pressing her hands to her face. The shaking was worse now, reaction setting in. This is my fault, Calder said quietly. I should have been more careful. Should have thought how it would look. Clara dropped her hands, staring at him. Your fault for being injured, for accepting help. For wanting you here. The admission hung between them. For being selfish enough to keep you despite knowing what people would say. I chose to come. I chose to stay. Why? He moved closer, not touching, but near enough she could feel his warmth. Why stay when it's this hard? Clara met his eyes. After everything, the gossip, the confrontation, the bone-deep exhaustion, she had no energy left for pretense. You know why. I need to hear it. Because somewhere between that first letter and now, I started caring about more than just employment. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Because when you look at me, I don't feel plain or too tall or unwanted. I feel seen. Clara? Her name was a prayer on his lips. But if I stay, it'll only get worse. The talk, the assumptions, your reputation. Damn my reputation. He cupped her face gently, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. Damn their talk and their judgment and their small minds. Easy for you to say. You're a man. You have power here. Then let me use it. His hands were steady, grounding her. Not to fight your battles. I know you can do that yourself. But to stand beside you. To make it clear that anyone who disrespects you disrespects me. That's not... People will think... Let them think the truth. Clara's breath caught, which is... That you matter to me. More than gossip. More than reputation. More than anything else in this God-forsaken place. Calder. I'm not a man of pretty words. Clara, don't know how to court proper. Don't know how to be gentle. But I know what I want. And I want you here. Not as my cook or housekeeper, as more. You barely know me. I know enough. His thumbs traced her cheekbones. Know you're strong enough to face down a drunk with a rolling pin. Brave enough to travel across the country on a stranger's word. Kind enough to sit with a man through his nightmares without judgment. You sat with me through mine. And I'd do it every night if you'd let me. He rested his forehead against hers. Stay, Clara. Not for the job, for me, for us, for whatever this is becoming. Clara closed her eyes, letting herself lean into his strength. The talk will get worse. Then we'll face it together. They might refuse to serve me at all. Then I'll drive you to the next town for supplies. Hell, I'll drive you to San Francisco if that's what it takes. Despite everything, she found herself almost smiling. That seems excessive. Nothing's excessive if it keeps you here. Clara pulled back enough to see his face. What she found there, determination mixed with vulnerability. Desire tempered by respect, made her decision. All right, she whispered. I'll stay. Thank God. He pulled her against his chest, and she let herself be held. Let herself feel safe despite the chaos of the night. We'll figure this out. Clara, make them see. I don't care if they see. The truth of it surprised her. Let them think what they want, as long as you know the truth. Which is, she pulled back to meet his eyes, that I'm yours, in whatever way you'll have me, but honestly, honorably, not because of gossip or assumption, but because I choose it. And I choose you. He said simply, tomorrow we'll go to town together. Make it clear where we stand. Which is courting, proper courting, with intention. His mouth quirked. If you'll have me. I thought you didn't know how to court proper. I'll learn. For you, I'll learn. Clara touched his face, marveling at this man who offered not just protection but partnership. Then yes, I'll have you. When he kissed her, it was careful, questioning. When she kissed him back, it was answer and promise both. Whatever storms came next, they'd weather them together. And in that moment, with flour in her hair and tears on her cheeks and Calder's arms around her, Clara felt something she'd never expected to find. She felt home. The town hall meeting was packed to the rafters, unusual for a Tuesday evening in Dustvale. Word had spread like wildfire about the proposed railroad deal. Prescott Holdings wanted to buy up half the valley for their new line, and tonight the townspeople would vote. Clara sat beside Calder in the back row, acutely aware of the space that had formed around them. Since that night in the kitchen 2 weeks ago, their courtship had been the scandal of the county. Calder's response had been characteristically direct. He'd taken her to Sunday service, sat beside her in full view of everyone, and walked her out afterward with her hand on his arm. The message was clear. Clara Wren was under his protection and courting his interest. It hadn't stopped the whispers, but it had changed their tone. Prescott's offering good money. Mayor Wilkins was saying from the podium, more than most of us will see in a lifetime. Progress is coming whether we like it or not. Might as well profit from it. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Clara saw ranchers nodding, already counting their windfall. The railroad would bring prosperity. They said, connect Dustvale to civilization. What was a little land compared to that? And what happens to the families who don't want to sell? The voice came from the middle of the room. Old Samuel Morrison, whose ranch had been in his family for 3 generations. Prescott's man made it clear. They'll use eminent domain if needed. Sell willing or get forced out. That's not progress, that's theft. Now, Sam, the mayor said smoothly. No need for inflammatory language. This is a business opportunity. It's a land grab. Calder stood, his presence immediately commanding attention. I've seen Prescott's contracts, full of fine print that favors them. They're offering 1/3 of what the land's worth, betting we're too ignorant to know better. Easy for you to say. Row, someone called out. You've got the biggest spread in the valley. Rest of us are barely scraping by. Which is exactly why you shouldn't take the first offer dangled in front of you. Calder's voice carried clearly through the room. Once that railroad comes through, land values will triple. You sell now. You're giving away your children's inheritance for pennies. What do you know about children's inheritance, Mrs.? Holstead's voice was sharp with disdain. Man your age, no family, keeping company with… She cut herself off, but her glance at Clara finished the sentence. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her head high. She'd learned in the past weeks that showing weakness only encouraged the vultures. My personal life has no bearing on land rights, Calder said evenly. The question is whether we let outsiders dictate our future or stand together to negotiate fair terms. Stand together? Mayor Wilkins laughed. Since when have you cared about standing with anyone? Roe, you've kept to yourself for years, barely participating in town life. Now suddenly you want to lead. The crowd murmured agreement. Calder was respected but not liked, too distant, too independent. Why should they follow him now? Clara stood before she could think better of it. May I speak? Silence fell like a hammer. Women didn't typically address town meetings, especially not women of questionable reputation. Mayor Wilkins looked flustered. Miss Wren, this is hardly… I have something to say. She moved to the aisle, where everyone could see her. Her knees shook, but her voice was steady. You call me an outsider. Fair enough. I've only been here a few months. But sometimes outsiders see clearest. She had their attention now, if only from shock. I came here with nothing, Clara continued. Answered an advertisement for honest work, expecting nothing more. What I found was a community that judges first and asks questions later, that measures worth by gossip instead of character. That's so busy tearing each other down. You can't see when you're all about to be robbed blind. Now see here, Mrs. Holstead started. I'm not finished. Clara's voice cut through the interruption. You want to know what kind of man Calder Roe is? He's the kind who pays fair wages and keeps his word, who risks his life for his workers, who judges people by their actions, not their circumstances. If that's not leadership, I don't know what is. Pretty speech from his… someone began. His what? Clara faced the speaker directly. Go ahead, say it. His cook, his housekeeper, his intended… She lifted her chin. I'm all of those things and proud of it. Just as you should be proud of this land your family's built. But Prescott Holdings doesn't care about your pride or your history. They care about profit, and they're counting on your prejudice and division to make you easy pickings. The room had gone completely still. Mr. Roe is offering to help negotiate better terms, not because he needs to. His ranch isn't in the proposed path. He's offering because it's right, because neighbors should stand together. But you're so busy gossiping about his personal choices. You can't see the gift he's giving you. And what gift is that? Mayor Wilkins asked coldly. Knowledge, experience. Someone who's actually read those contracts and understands the tricks. Clara's voice grew passionate. My father sold our farm to developers when I was young. Thought he was getting rich. The promises they made. Schools, stores, prosperity for all. You know what? We got pushed off our land for a fraction of its worth while they made fortunes. Don't let that happen here. She could see her words landing, doubt creeping into faces that had been certain moments before. You talk about standing together, Morrison said slowly. But Roe's right. We've never been much for unity. How do we start now? Calder stood again. Form a landowners association. Hire a lawyer who works for us, not them. Negotiate as one voice instead of dozens. They're counting on picking us off one by one. Together, we have power. And if they use that eminent domain threat? Someone asked. Then we fight it in court, together. Pool resources for legal fees. Make it expensive enough that they'll negotiate fairly instead. Calder's gaze swept the room. But only if we stand united. The moment we start undercutting each other, we lose. Clara moved back to her seat, feeling the weight of all those eyes. She'd just put herself forward in a way that would either damn her further or change minds. There was no middle ground now. "I need time to think," Morrison said finally. Others nodded agreement. "Then I propose we table the vote." Calder said, "Give people a week to review the contracts. Consider options. Meet again next Tuesday for the decision." Mayor Wilkins clearly wanted to object but couldn't find grounds. All in favor of postponing. Most hands went up. Clara noticed even some of Wilkins's usual supporters wavering. "Motion carries," the mayor said sourly. "We reconvene next week." As people filed out, the atmosphere was different, thoughtful instead of certain. Clara caught fragments of conversation, worries about children's futures, questions about contract terms, grudging admission that Roe might have a point. Outside, Calder helped her into the wagon. Neither spoke until they were clear of town. "That was brave," he said finally, "and possibly foolish." "Which part? Standing up in a room full of people who despise me, defending you publicly, or admitting my father's failures?" "All of it." He glanced at her. "Why did you do it?" Clara considered. "Because someone needed to. Because they were letting pride and prejudice blind them to sense. Because—" She took a breath. "Because I've seen what happens when people don't stand together. My father thought he was being clever, negotiating alone. It destroyed us. I'm sorry." "Don't be. It taught me to recognize false promises." She smiled slightly. "And to value honest ones." They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Then Calder spoke again. "You called yourself my intended." Heat rose in her cheeks. That was presumptuous. We've only been courting." It was accurate. He kept his eyes on the road, but she saw his hands tighten on the reins. "If you'll have me. Proper proposal to follow when I can do it right. But yes, I intend to marry you. Clara Wren. If you'll take a stubborn rancher with more cattle than social graces." Clara's throat went tight. "And if the town never accepts us?" "Then we'll build our own world at the ranch. But I think tonight might have changed some minds. Or made things worse. Maybe." He reached over, took her hand. "Worth it either way." As they turned down the ranch road, Clara saw lights in the windows and felt that strange sensation again. Homecoming. Whatever happened with the vote, with the town, with the gossips, she had a place, a purpose, a man who saw her worth even when the world didn't. "Yes," she said quietly. "Yes. To your not-quite proposal, yes, I'll take you. Stubborn cattle and lack of social graces and all." His smile transformed his face, rare and brilliant. "Thank God, I was prepared to grovel. I might enjoy seeing that." "Woman, you've seen me laid low by a barn beam and fevered with pain. Haven't I groveled enough?" "Never enough," Clara said, surprising herself with the teasing warmth in her voice. "But we have time." "All the time in the world," he agreed, and raised their joined hands to his lips. Behind them, Dustvale wrestled with its future. Ahead, the ranch waited, solid and sure. And beside her, Calder Rowe, who'd promised nothing but honesty and delivered everything, held her hand like it was precious. Whatever storms came next, Clara thought, they'd weather them together. The town could gossip, Prescott Holdings could threaten, but here in this wagon, heading home under stars that didn't care about reputation or propriety, she'd found something worth fighting for. And fight she would, with rolled pins or speeches or whatever else it took, because Calder was right together. They had power. Together, they were home. The smell of smoke woke Clara from deep sleep, acrid and wrong. For a moment she lay confused, thinking perhaps she'd left something on the stove. Then she heard the shouting, saw the orange glow flickering against her window, and her blood turned to ice. Fire, fire in the kitchen. She burst from her room to find the kitchen already ablaze. Flames licked up the walls where her carefully arranged shelves had stood. The curtains she'd mended were towers of fire. Smoke billowed thick and choking, obscuring the doorway. Clara Calder appeared through the smoke like a phantom, grabbing her arm. "Get out now!" "My things. Leave them." But she twisted away, dropping to her knees where the smoke was thinner. Her mother's cookbook was there by the stove, along with the Bible and her parents' photograph. She couldn't lose them, not these last pieces of her past. The heat was incredible. Her lungs burned with each breath. She grabbed the cookbook and Bible, fingers scrabbling for the photograph frame. The roar of flames filled her ears, drowning out Calder's shouts. Strong hands seized her waist, hauling her bodily from the inferno. Calder dragged her through the door into blessed cold air, both of them coughing and gasping. Behind them, the kitchen window exploded from the heat. Water brigade. Luther was organizing the men, forming a line from the well. But Clara could see it was hopeless. The fire had taken hold too fast, too fierce. This was no accident. She could smell the kerosene even through the smoke. Calder's hands were all over her, checking for burns. "Are you insane? You could have died." "I couldn't," she broke off coughing, clutching her rescued treasures. "I couldn't lose them too." His expression softened even as he pulled her further from the heat. "Clara." "Boss, your hands," Tom pointed. Clara gasped. Calder's palms were badly burned, the skin already blistering where he'd beaten at flames to reach her. He hadn't even seemed to notice. "It's nothing," he said, but she could see the pain tightening his features. "Inside, now." She steered him toward the main house. "Tom, bring my medical supplies from the pantry if it's still standing, cold water and clean cloths. Hurry." She worked by lamplight in the front parlor while the men fought the fire. Calder sat silent as stone while she cleaned and wrapped his burns, but she saw the muscle jumping in his jaw. "This is going to scar," she said quietly. "Worth it." "Calder, you're safe. That's all that matters." He caught her hand with his less damaged one. "But if you ever run into a fire again for possessions, they're not just possessions." She traced the cover of her mother's cookbook, now singed along the edges. "They're all I have left of who I was before." "You're wrong." His voice was fierce. "You're so much more than remnants of the past. You're the woman who faced down this town, who healed my shoulder, who makes 23 rough men sit up straighter at meals. You don't need objects to prove your worth." Tears burned her eyes from smoke. She told herself, "The kitchen is destroyed. Kitchens can be rebuilt." "My room." "You'll use mine. I'll bunk with the men." "Calder, no. People will talk worse than ever." "Let them." He stood, pulling her up with him. "In fact, let's give them something real to talk about." Before she could ask what he meant, he was striding toward the door. Clara followed, confused, to find the fire mostly controlled. The kitchen was a blackened skeleton, but they'd kept it from spreading to the main house. The men stood in exhausted groups, faces smeared with soot. Calder raised his voice to Carrie. "Someone set this fire, deliberately, targeted the kitchen where Clara sleeps." Angry mutters rose from the men. In the months since Clara had arrived, she'd won most of them over with good food and fair treatment. This attack on her was an attack on their comfort too. "Whoever did this is a coward." Calder continued. "Sneaking in at night, targeting a woman alone. They want to drive Clara away. Want to break what we're building here." "Not happening," Luther growled. Others voiced agreement. "Glad to hear it, because come morning, we're going to town, all of us, and we're going to make something clear." Calder turned to Clara, and the look in his eyes made her heart stutter. "Miss Wren has agreed to be my wife. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. No more sneaking, no more harassment, face to face like men, or not at all." Stunned silence greeted this announcement. Clara felt every eye on her, felt the weight of this public declaration. They'd discussed marriage, but this... Well, Calder addressed his men. "Any objections?" About time, Luther said dryly. A ripple of laughter broke the tension. Though your proposal technique needs work, boss. Clara Calder turned to her fully. I know this isn't how we planned, but I'm tired of dancing around it, tired of giving them ammunition for their poison. Marry me. Not someday. Now. This week, before they can plan anything worse. She should have been angry at the presumption, the public pressure, but all she felt was a wild surge of something like joy. The kitchen was gone. Her few possessions were mostly ash. But Calder stood there with bandaged hands and fierce eyes, offering not just protection but partnership, offering to face the world beside her. Consequences be damned. Yes, she said clearly. This week. Tomorrow if we can manage it. Whoops and cheers erupted from the men. Someone produced a bottle of whiskey for toasting. In the midst of destruction, a celebration bloomed. But Clara noticed movement at the edge of the firelight. Horace Whitman, Mayor Wilkins's nephew, he'd been visiting the ranch on some pretense of business, staying in the bunkhouse. Now he slipped away into darkness. Luther, she called quietly. Whitman's running. The old hand's eyes sharpened. He jerked his head at Jake and Tom, and they melted into the shadows after him. Calder had noticed too. So, now we know who carried Tails to town. Question is whether he also carried kerosene. Does it matter the damage is done? It matters. His voice was steel. I told them at the meeting, attack one of us. You attack all of us. Time to prove I meant it. They didn't have to wait long. Jake and Tom returned, dragging Whitman between them. The man's fancy clothes were torn, his nose bloodied. Found him saddling a horse. Jake reported, real eager to leave all of a sudden. I don't know anything, Whitman blustered. You can't prove. Your boots, Clara interrupted. Everyone looked at her. Turn them over. I don't have to. Luther grabbed Whitman's leg, yanking it up. The sole was stained with kerosene, a clear footprint in ash and accelerant. Interesting, Calder said mildly. How'd that get there? Whitman's face had gone white. It's not. The mayor said. The mayor said what? The story spilled out, a plan to drive Clara away, make the ranch unstable, force Calder to sell to Prescott Holdings. The fire was meant to scare, not kill, but things had gotten out of hand. Though if she died, Whitman sneered, recovering some bravado. No real loss, just another bit of trail trash thinking she's better than... Calder's fist connected with his jaw. Whitman dropped, unconscious, before he hit the ground. Jake, Tom, tie him up. Come morning, we're delivering him to the territorial marshal. Let him explain attempted murder to a real lawman. Calder flexed his hand, wincing as the movement pulled his burns. The rest of you, get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. As the men dispersed, Clara touched Calder's arm. You hit him? He insulted you. You could have killed him. Your hands are mine to risk. He cupped her face gently with his bandaged fingers. No one speaks of you that way? Not while I breathe. I've heard worse. Not anymore. He pressed his forehead to hers. I'm sorry. About the kitchen, the fire, all of it. You came here for peace and found nothing but trouble. I found you, Clara said simply. Worth any amount of trouble. They stood in the ruins of her domain, smoke still rising from blackened timbers. Her hands were sooty, her nightgown singed, her hair wild with ash and wind. But when Calder kissed her, none of it mattered. The world could burn as long as they faced it together. We'll rebuild, he promised against her lips. Better than before, a kitchen worthy of you. I don't need worthy, I just need functional. And maybe, she smiled slightly, maybe a lock on the door. Bars on the windows, a moat if you want one. Just you, Clara said. That's protection enough. Later, settled in Calder's bed while he took the floor despite her protests. Clara stared at the ceiling and marveled at the turn of events. She'd lost her kitchen but gained a public declaration, lost her privacy but gained a fierce defender, lost her few possessions but kept what truly mattered. The man who'd risk burned hands to pull her from flames. Outside, she could hear the men taking turns on watch, protecting what remained. Tomorrow would bring confrontations, accusations, the complex dance of law and county politics. But tonight, she was safe in Calder's room, wearing his shirt, surrounded by his scent of leather and smoke. The cookbook lay beside her, pages crisp with heat but intact. Her mother's recipes, her heritage of nurture and sustenance. She'd build her new kitchen around these saved treasures, create something stronger from the ashes. "Can't sleep," Calder's voice came from the darkness. "Too much to think about?" "Then don't think. Just rest. Tomorrow needs you strong." "Tomorrow needs us strong," she corrected. She heard his smile in his reply. "Us, then, always us." Clara closed her eyes, letting that promise wrap around her like armor. They'd burned her sanctuary, but they couldn't burn her spirit. And with Calder beside her, stubborn, protective, unflinching Calder, she'd face whatever came next. The kitchen was gone, but home, she was learning, was more than walls and stoves. Home was the person who ran into flames for you, who stood against the world at your side. Home was what they'd build from these ashes, together. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the ranch in pristine white just 2 weeks after Clara and Calder's wedding. She stood in her new kitchen, rebuilt stronger and better than before, watching fat flakes drift past the windows. The men had outdone themselves in the construction, each adding touches they thought she'd appreciate. Luther had carved decorative trim for the shelves. Jake and Tom installed twice as many windows for light. Even some townspeople had contributed, shamed by Whitman's arrest into making amends. "Admiring our handiwork," Calder appeared behind her, arms sliding around her waist. "Admiring the peace," Clara corrected, leaning back against him. First quiet morning in months. Indeed, the past weeks had been a whirlwind. Their wedding, hastily arranged but surprisingly well attended. The trial of Horace Whitman, which had exposed deeper corruption in the mayor's office. The successful formation of the Landowners Association, with Calder reluctantly elected as president. Through it all, Clara had cooked and managed and stood steady as a rock while change swirled around them. "Too quiet," Calder murmured against her hair. "Makes me nervous." Clara laughed softly. "Ever the pessimist?" "Realist. Good things don't last without defending." She turned in his arms, studying his face. The past months had aged him. New lines around his eyes, a thread or two of silver in his dark hair. But there was a contentment there, too, a softening that hadn't existed before. "Some things are worth defending," she said. "Everything about you is worth defending." Before she could respond, the kitchen door burst open, bringing a swirl of snow and commotion. Tom stumbled in, supporting a figure so bundled in scarves and coats that features were invisible. "Found her on the road," Tom gasped. "Half frozen. Horse gave out a mile back." Clara was already moving, guiding them to the fire. "Get those wet clothes off her. Tom, hot water and blankets. Calder, send someone for Doc Morrison." As they peeled away layers, a young woman emerged, barely 18, with delicate features and the kind of beauty that made men foolish. But her lips were blue with cold, her breathing shallow. "Please," she whispered through chattering teeth. "Please, looking for Calder Row." "I'm here." Calder knelt beside her. "What's wrong?" My name is Rose Whitman, Horace's sister." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, so sorry, but I have nowhere else." Clara saw Calder tense. Horace Whitman was serving 5 years for arson and attempted murder. His family had been disgraced. The mayor forced to resign. Why would his sister come here? "Please," Rose continued. "They burned our house, Said we were traitors to the town. Father's dead. Mother won't wake up. I didn't know where. Who burned your house? Clara demanded, wrapping the girl in warm blankets. Don't know. Men with torches. Said the Whitmans brought shame. Said we deserved. She broke down sobbing. Clara met Calder's eyes over the girl's head, the cycle of vengeance continuing. Violence breeding violence. Everything they'd fought to stop. Doc's on his way. Luther reported from the doorway. Storm's getting worse, though. Might take time. Then we handle it ourselves, Clara said firmly. She helped Rose to a chair near the fire. First things first. You're safe here. No one will hurt you under this roof. But my brother, what he did to you. Your brother made his choices. You're not responsible for them. Clara pressed a cup of hot tea into the girl's shaking hands. Drink, slowly. Over the next hour, the full story emerged. After Horace's conviction, the Whitman family had faced increasing hostility. Boycotts of their business, stones through windows. Then last night, the final escalation, masked men with torches. The house ablaze. Her parents trapped inside. Rose had barely escaped on the family's last horse. I remembered what people said, she whispered. That Miss Clara, Mrs. Rowe, that she knew about standing alone, about surviving when everyone's against you. I thought, hoped. You thought right, Calder said quietly. You'll stay here until we sort this out. Calder, Clara murmured, drawing him aside. The men won't like this. The town already thinks we're troublemakers, harboring a Whitman. Since when do we care what the town thinks? But his expression was troubled. Though you're right about the men, this could divide them. As if summoned by the concern, voices rose outside. Clara recognized Luther's growl, Tom's higher pitch, arguments about loyalty, justice, the wisdom of sheltering enemies. I should go, Rose said, struggling to stand. I'm causing trouble. Sit. Clara's tone brooked no argument. The only trouble here is grown men acting like children. She strode to the door, yanking it open. A cluster of ranch hands stood in the snow, mid-argument. Gentlemen, she said coolly. Is there a problem? Mrs. Rowe. Luther looked uncomfortable. With respect, that girl's brother tried to kill you. Yes, and someone tried to kill her last night. Should we continue the cycle eye for eye until everyone's blind? It's not that simple, someone started. It's exactly that simple. Clara stepped out, heedless of the cold. We choose, every day. We choose, vengeance or mercy, continuing the poison or stopping it. I know my choice. Easy for you to say, Hank muttered. You got your justice, your happy ending. Clara laughed, sharp and bitter. Happy ending. My kitchen burned, my reputation destroyed, months of harassment and fear. You think marrying Calder erased all that? The men shifted uncomfortably. But I also got something else, she continued. A chance to be better than those who hurt me, to build something worthwhile instead of tearing down. That's what we've been doing here. Isn't it building? The girl's not responsible for her brother, Calder added, joining her. Turn her out. We're no better than the mob that burned her home. Is that who we are now? Long silence, broken only by wind and settling snow. Finally, Luther spat to one side. Girl can stay, but she works like everyone else. No special treatment. Fair enough, Calder agreed. The crowd dispersed slowly, not entirely convinced but willing to follow their leaders. Clara knew this wasn't over. Resentment would simmer. Trust would be thin. But it was a start. Inside, Rose looked between them with wonder. Why? Why help me after everything? Clara settled beside her, choosing words carefully. Because someone has to break the pattern. Hate only breeds more hate. Someone has to say enough and mean it. But the cost. there's always a cost. Clara touched her wedding ring, still new enough to feel strange. The question is whether you're paying for destruction or construction. Doc Morrison arrived as the afternoon wore on, confirming what Clara suspected: exhaustion, exposure, shock, but nothing time and care wouldn't heal. They settled Rose in the small room off the kitchen, the one Clara had first occupied. That night, as another blizzard raged outside, Clara found herself standing at her old window, full circle, yet everything changed. "Regrets?" Calder asked, joining her. "No, just thinking about patterns, how they repeat until someone chooses differently." "You chose differently, from the start. So did you, hiring a woman sight unseen, defending her against gossip, marrying her despite everything. Best choice I ever made." He pulled her close. "Even if you do insist on collecting strays." "She's not a stray, she's a test." "Of what?" "Of who we really are, what we're really building here." Clara turned to face him. It's easy to talk about community when everyone agrees. Harder when there's real conflict. "You think she'll stay?" "I think she needs time to heal. Then she'll decide." Clara smiled slightly. "Though Luther did say she had to work. Think she's ever cooked for 23 men. "About to learn," Calder said dryly. "Trial by fire." Poor choice of words. "You know what I mean." They stood together, watching snow erase the world outside. Tomorrow would bring challenges: suspicious men, a frightened girl, a community still learning how to heal. But tonight, the kitchen was warm, the house was safe, and the choice had been made. "I never expected this," Clara said softly. "When I answered your advertisement, never imagined I'd end up in the middle of changing a whole town." "Disappointed?" "No, just surprised. I thought I was running to isolation. Instead, I found—" She gestured at the house full of people, the life they'd built, the future they were shaping. This, Calder agreed. "Whatever this becomes." A sound from the kitchen. Rose, probably looking for water or just unable to sleep. Clara sighed, preparing to return to caretaker mode. But Calder caught her hand. "Thank you," he said simply, "for choosing mercy, for teaching me there's another way." "We're teaching each other," Clara corrected. "That's what partners do." She went to tend their unexpected guest, leaving Calder by the window. In the kitchen, Rose sat at the table, tears on her cheeks but something like hope in her eyes. "I can work," she said immediately. "I can learn. I won't be a burden." "Everyone's a burden sometimes," Clara said gently, putting the kettle on. "The trick is taking turns, bearing each other's weight when needed." "Is that what you and Mr. Rowe do?" Clara considered. "Yes, though it took us time to learn. We're both too used to standing alone." "But you're not alone now." "No," Clara smiled. "Neither are you." As she made tea for a frightened girl in a rebuilt kitchen, snow sealing them away from the world's judgment, Clara marveled at the strange paths life took, from unwanted spinster to wife, from outcast to defender of outcasts, from solitary to part of something larger than herself. The old Clara would have sent Rose away, protected her hard-won peace at any cost, but that Clara hadn't known what she knew now. That real peace came not from isolation, but from choosing to stand for something, even when it cost. Especially when it cost. Outside, winter raged. Inside, two women who'd lost everything sat in lamplight, sharing tea and silence and the beginning of understanding. And upstairs, Calder Rowe, who'd once wanted only solitude and simplicity, planned how to protect them both from the storms still coming. Because storms always came, but now, none of them would face them alone. The spring thaw came late that year, but when it arrived, it transformed the Montana landscape into a carpet of wildflowers. Clara stood in her kitchen garden, hands deep in rich soil, planting the seeds that would feed them through another year. 6 months had passed since Rose Whitman's arrival, and the ranch had found its new rhythm. "You're humming again," Calder observed from the fence where he'd been watching her work. "Am I?" Clara smiled, brushing dirt from her hands. "I hadn't noticed. You do it when you're content. Same tune your mother used to hum, you said." She straightened, touched by his remembering. "Mama always said gardens know when you're happy, makes things grow better. Then we'll have the finest vegetables in Montana." He opened the gate for her. "Come, there's something I want to show you." Clara followed, curious. Calder rarely interrupted her morning gardening. He led her past the new barn, past the bunkhouse where she could hear the men preparing for the day's work, to a small rise overlooking the valley. There, a new building stood, modest but solid, with windows facing east to catch the morning sun. "What's this?" Clara asked. "Rose has been talking about starting a school for the ranch children, and any from town who'll come." He watched her face carefully. "I thought, well, if we're building a community, might as well build it right." Clara's throat tightened. 3 of the ranch hands had families now, children who ran wild and unlettered. Town children, too, those whose parents couldn't afford the private tutor the wealthy employed. "Does Rose know?" "Not yet. Wanted your approval first. It's a big step, opening our land to town folks' children. After everything, it's exactly what we should do." Clara took his hand. "Show them we mean what we say about building together." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the valley gold. So much had changed since that first dusty day when she'd arrived, uncertain and alone. The ranch had become a small community unto itself, with Rose teaching letters to anyone who'd learn, Luther's nephew arriving to help with the horses, even a few townswomen venturing out for Clara's weekly canning lessons. "There's something else," Calder said eventually. "Something I've been meaning to tell you." Clara turned, alerted by something in his tone. "What?" "I've been writing to a lawyer in Helena about adopting Rose officially, making her family in law as well as practice." He met her eyes. "But only if you agree. She's been more your project than mine." "She's not a project," Clara said softly. "She's become like a sister, a daughter, both, somehow." "So that's yes." "That's yes." She squeezed his hand. "Though people will talk. The scandal of it." "Let them talk. They've done nothing but talk since you arrived. Hasn't stopped us yet." True enough. The gossips had gradually run out of steam as the ranch prospered and the Landowners Association successfully negotiated better terms with the railroad. Success, Clara had learned, was the best revenge against small minds. "Mrs. Row, mister. Row!" Rose's voice carried across the morning air. She ran toward them, skirts hiked up, face glowing with excitement. "The most wonderful thing." She skidded to a stop, breathless, waving a letter. "From the Territorial Board of Education, they've approved my teaching certificate. I can officially run a school." Clara caught the young woman now in a fierce hug. "I'm so proud of you." "I couldn't have done it without you, either of you." Rose's eyes shimmered with tears. "When I came here, I thought my life was over. But you gave me purpose, direction, family." "You gave us the same," Calder said gruffly. "Ranch was too quiet anyway. Needed more chaos." Rose laughed, wiping her eyes. "Well, you're about to get it. I've already had inquiries from 15 families. 15! Can you imagine?" Clara could imagine, could see the small building full of children learning to read and cipher. Rose patient and gentle as Clara had taught her to be. Could see connections forming between ranch and town. Old wounds healing through the simple act of educating children together. "We'll need supplies," she said practically. "Slates, chalk, books." "Already making a list?" Rose assured her. "And Mrs. Morrison offered to donate her late husband's library. Said he'd have wanted it used for learning. Another bridge built, Clara thought. Doc Morrison's widow reaching out, despite her initial coldness when Clara first arrived. Time and persistence wearing down resistance like water on stone. The morning progressed with plans and preparations. By noon, the kitchen was full of people, ranch hands grabbing quick meals, Rose sketching classroom layouts, even a few townspeople who'd ridden out to discuss the school. Clara moved between them all, serving food and coffee, listening to conversations that would have been impossible a year ago. "Never thought I'd see the day," Luther commented, watching Tom help Rose hang a small bell outside the schoolhouse. "Whitman's and Rose working together, town and ranch united. You've worked miracles. Mrs. Rowe." "Not miracles," Clara corrected, refilling his cup. "Just stubbornness and good food. Amazing what people will overlook for a decent meal." Luther chuckled. "More than that, you showed us a different way. The boss, too. He was a hard man before you came. Fair, but distant. Now look at him." Clara followed his gaze to where Calder was helping adjust the schoolhouse door, patiently showing one of the younger hands how to true the hinges. There was an ease to him now, a warmth that had been buried under years of solitary survival. "We changed each other," she said simply. That night, after the excitement had died down and the ranch settled into evening quiet, Clara found herself in her favorite spot, the kitchen, now truly hers in every sense. She was writing in her mother's cookbook, adding new recipes she'd developed, notes about feeding crowds and making do with frontier ingredients. "Still working?" Calder asked, joining her at the table. "Recording for whoever comes after." She showed him the pages. "Rose, perhaps, or maybe—" She trailed off, hand moving unconsciously to her stomach. Calder went very still. "Clara, it's early yet, but I'm fairly certain." She met his eyes, saw the wonder dawning there. "By harvest time, I think." He was around the table in an instant, pulling her carefully into his arms. How do you feel?" "Terrified," she admitted. "Happy, worried, everything at once." "That sounds about right." He pressed his forehead to hers. "A child, our child, growing up on this ranch, in this community we're building." Clara smiled through tears she hadn't expected. Learning from the start that different people can work together, that kindness matters more than conformity. Learning to be stubborn as their mother and protective as their father. Heaven help us all. They laughed, holding each other in the lamplight. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance. Not a threat anymore. Just part of the landscape they'd learned to navigate. The sound of the wild that no longer seemed foreign, but simply part of home. "I should tell Rose," Clara said eventually. "She'll want to adjust her school plans, make room for little ones." "Tomorrow," Calder said. "Tonight, just let me hold you, both of you." Clara settled against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work and dedication. Those same hands that had pulled her from fire, that had rebuilt her kitchen, that had helped her plant gardens and dreams alike. "No one's ever seen me like this," she murmured, echoing words from months past. "Like what?" "Happy, whole, home." She tilted her face up to his. "I spent so long believing I was meant to be alone. Too plain, too tall, too difficult. But you saw something else." "I saw you," Calder said simply. "That was enough, more than enough." The kiss was gentle, a promise renewed. When they finally made their way upstairs, Clara paused at the window overlooking their domain. The ranch spread out under starlight. House, barns, bunkhouse, and now schoolhouse. Each building representing growth, change, community forged from conflict. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The school would open, bringing town children to ranch land. Her pregnancy would progress. adding another layer to their evolving family. The railroad would come through, changing everything again. Life would continue its relentless forward motion. But tonight, Clara Rowe, former spinster, former outcast, now wife and mother-to-be and pillar of an unlikely community, stood in the home she'd helped build and knew bone-deep contentment. She'd traveled across a continent on the promise of honest work and found so much more. Love that didn't require her to be smaller or quieter or different. Purpose that used every skill she'd developed in years of survival. Family both given and chosen. "Coming to bed," Calder called softly. "Coming," she answered, taking one last look at the kingdom they'd created from dust and determination. In her mind, she could see it all unfolding, children running between house and school, Rose teaching with patience and joy, Calder leading with wisdom earned through trial, herself at the center providing food and comfort and fierce protection to all who needed it. A future built on the revolutionary idea that people could choose to be better than their worst impulses, that communities could be forged from forgiveness rather than revenge. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. But as Clara climbed the stairs to where her husband waited, as new life quickened within her, as their adopted daughter dreamed of educating a new generation, she knew with certainty that every struggle had been worth it. She'd answered an advertisement expecting nothing but survival. Instead, she'd found everything: love, purpose, home, and the knowledge that even the plainest woman could help change the world, one meal and one choice at a time. And in the morning, when the sun rose over Rowe Ranch, it would illuminate not just buildings and land, but possibility itself. The possibility that people could choose kindness over cruelty, that communities could heal, that love could grow in the most unlikely soil. Clara smiled, closing the bedroom door on the day and opening her arms to whatever tomorrow would bring. She'd faced down gossips and fires and her own demons to get here. Whatever came next, she was ready. They were ready. Together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Clara and Calder's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850, hit that like button, and support us by clicking the hype button so more people can discover these stories of love, courage, and redemption in the American frontier.